The helicopter blades cut through the summer air, and everyone froze. Champagne glasses stopped mid-toast. Laughter died. 200 pairs of eyes turned upward as the massive black helicopter descended toward the Ashford Estate's pristine lawn, sending rose petals spiraling like confetti. The downdraft whipped through designer dresses and perfectly styled hair, but no one moved. They just stared as the aircraft touched down on grass they'd walked across moments before. Then the door opened. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I stepped out in my Valentino gown, hand resting on the frame like I'd been born in helicopters, like I'd never known the inside of a city bus. 3 years ago, I'd walked a mile to this mansion in cheap heels that gave me blisters. Tonight, I arrived from the sky. I looked directly at Victoria Ashford on her terrace, the woman who'd laughed when I pulled out a bus ticket instead of valet keys, who'd made sure everyone knew I was the poor girl who didn't belong. Her face went pale. They mocked me for being poor, for riding the bus. But tonight, they learned who I'd become. And the silence was sweeter than any revenge. Let me tell you how a girl with a bus ticket became a woman who owned the sky. And that was just the beginning. Victoria Ashford's engagement party was the event of the season. I was only invited because I was dating Marcus Chen, a junior associate at her fiancé's firm. Marcus had insisted I come, said these connections mattered for his career. I should have seen the warning signs. Days before, he'd told me, "Just blend in. Don't mention the bus thing. Say you came with me." The bus thing. Like my reality was an embarrassment he had to manage. Like being poor was a disease I needed to hide from his wealthy colleagues. But I didn't know what was coming. I'd saved 3 months for that black dress. Ate ramen for weeks, skipped lunches. Every dollar counted because I wanted to look like I belonged, even though deep down, I knew I didn't. I knew I was walking into a world that would never accept me. I had no idea how right I was. Marcus refused to pick me up, claimed late meetings. But I knew the truth. He didn't want to be seen with me arriving together. Didn't want his colleagues connecting him to the girl who couldn't afford a car, to the girl who took public transportation. That should have told me everything. When I arrived at the iron gates, luxury cars gleamed under the lights. Ferraris, Bentleys, a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Each one cost more than my mother made in a decade. The valet looked at me expectantly, hand outstretched for keys I didn't have. And then it happened. "I took the bus," I said quietly. "The stop's about a mile down the road." His amusement was instant. Sharp. Cruel. "The bus?" he repeated, loud enough for the cluster of guests behind me to hear, loud enough to make sure everyone knew, and everyone did. Victoria descended the entrance stairs in her champagne gown like she was floating. Perfect makeup, perfect hair, perfect life handed to her on a silver platter. "Emma, did you say you took the bus?" She said bus like it was a disease, like I'd admitted to something unforgivable. The crowd around us laughed. Not quiet chuckles, loud, performative laughter that said, "Look at her. Look at this girl who doesn't belong. Look at the poor girl who dared to show up here." I stood there, frozen, as my humiliation became their entertainment. I didn't realize we had public transportation out this far. How resourceful of you. More laughter. Someone pulled out their phone. Marcus appeared behind her, face flushed. Not with anger at them, with embarrassment. At me. And that's when my heart shattered. He laughed along, a hollow sound that cut deeper than any insult. Victoria looped her arm through his like they were old friends. "Next time Marcus can give you a ride. We wouldn't want you keeping your bus ticket as a souvenir." Then she did something I'll never forget. She plucked the transfer slip from my hand, held it up like evidence in a trial, like proof that I was beneath them. More laughter, a camera flash. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, is she serious?" When I looked at Marcus desperately, begging him silently to defend me, he shrugged. You know how it is. Appearances matter in my industry." 3 seconds. That's how long it took him to choose his career over my dignity, to choose them over me, to prove that I'd never mattered to him at all. But I didn't know this was just the beginning. I stood there, frozen, as they walked away. As the crowd dispersed, still laughing. As the valet smirked and turned to the next arriving guest. I spent 2 hours at that party invisible. Marcus avoided me. Victoria made sure everyone knew the bus ticket story. I overheard it whispered at least 10 times. Did you hear about the girl who took the bus? They said it like I'd committed a crime, like poverty was something I'd chosen. Later in the parking lot, Marcus broke up with me, and everything changed. You don't understand this world, Emma. I need someone who fits, someone who doesn't need explanations for basic things. He left me there with no ride home, no apology, no acknowledgement that he'd humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered to him. I walked that mile back to the bus stop in my best dress, crying the entire way. My heels rubbed my feet raw, my makeup ran, my dress caught on a branch and tore. That night changed everything, but I didn't know yet how much. Destiny was already preparing my comeback. I grew up where success meant making rent on time. My mother worked 3 jobs after my father left when I was 7. She cleaned offices at night, served breakfast at a diner in the morning, did alterations for a seamstress in between. She never stopped fighting. I wore clothes she'd sewn from remnants, learned to ignore the comments about my weird outfits, learned to make myself small so people wouldn't notice how different I was. She'd come home exhausted, hands raw from scrubbing floors, and still find energy to help with my homework. You're going to be somebody, she'd tell me, eyes fierce with belief I didn't understand yet. You're going to have choices I never had. You're going to show them all. I got into a top state university on full scholarship, first in my family to attend college, but the struggle was far from over. I studied finance because I understood money's absence, understood how it shaped every door that opened or stayed closed, how it determined whether people looked at you or through you, how it decided if you were worth their time. I was learning the rules of a game I never chose to play. I watched wealthy classmates talk about internships at their father's firms, summer homes in the Hamptons, networking events I'd never see, spring breaks in Europe while I worked double shifts at a campus cafeteria just to afford textbooks. The divide felt impossible to cross. I learned to be invisible, to work twice as hard for half the recognition, to understand that the world wasn't fair, and it never would be. After graduation, I took a job at a mid-tier consulting firm. Entry-level analyst, long hours, mediocre pay, but it was professional. It was a start. That's where I met Marcus. He seemed different at first, said he admired my work ethic, took me to nice restaurants, made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I could bridge the gap between our worlds. I wanted so desperately to believe it. We dated 8 months before that party. I'd believed maybe I could belong in his world if I just tried hard enough. If I just learned the right things to say, wore the right clothes, laughed at the right jokes. If I just made myself small enough. But that was my biggest mistake. But that night shattered everything. The humiliation revealed how fragile my place in his life had been. How easily he could discard me when I became inconvenient. When I stopped being worth the effort. When my poverty became visible. And that's when something inside me broke. I spent a week in my tiny apartment, humiliated but strangely clear. I was done being the person people looked through. Done apologizing for being poor in a world that treated poverty like moral failure. Done making myself small for people who would never see me as equal. I refused to let a bus ticket define my limits. The girl who cried at that bus stop was finished apologizing for existing, and that's when the universe decided to test me. What happened next, I never saw coming. 2 months later, I was working past 10 at the consulting firm, finishing a report my boss would take credit for in the morning. I didn't notice the man in the doorway until he spoke. "You're here late." His voice made me look up immediately, and my life changed forever. Early 50s, impeccably tailored suit. Not flashy. Understated in a way that screamed real money. kind of expensive that doesn't need logos. The kind of power that doesn't announce itself. I could say the same, I replied, too tired to be intimidated. He smiled genuinely. Fair point. I own the building, saw your light on, wanted to make sure everything was all right. He walked closer, glanced at my screen. What are you working on? I shouldn't have told him. But exhaustion makes you honest, and honesty changed everything. I explained the market inefficiencies I'd identified in emerging biotech markets. The patterns no one else was seeing. The opportunities everyone was missing because they were too focused on what was already proven. Too focused on safe bets from people with the right pedigree. He asked sharp questions, the kind that showed real understanding, not just polite interest. What's your name? Emma Reeves. Emma, I'm James Thornton. My stomach dropped. I knew the name instantly, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. The venture capitalist who'd backed the biggest tech companies of the last 2 decades, who saw potential where others saw risk, who turned unknowns into billionaires, who had more power in one phone call than Victoria's entire social circle combined. And he was standing in my office. That analysis is better than anything your firm's produced in a year, he said, leaning against the desk. Why are you still here? Why hasn't someone hired you away? Because no one else will hire me. Wrong background, wrong connections, wrong last name. No one wants to take a chance on someone without pedigree, without the right family, without proof that I belong in their world. He studied me for a long moment. Then he handed me a card. Call me tomorrow. I had no idea this was the turning point. I'm looking for someone with your skills and hunger. Someone who won't waste opportunities because you know exactly what they cost. I stared at the card, not quite believing it was real. The next day I called, expecting nothing. A polite rejection. We'll keep you in mind. The day after, I met him at his office overlooking the bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art on the walls, the kind of space where billion-dollar decisions happened, where futures were made or destroyed with a single conversation. And mine was about to be made. He offered me a position at 3 times my salary. I invest in people, he said, not just companies, and I see someone who won't waste this chance. That's rarer than any degree from Harvard or Stanford. That's worth more than any connection. But this was just the beginning. He became my mentor, teaching me to navigate a world I'd only observed from outside, introducing me to founders, investors, power players. For the first time, someone with real power saw me as an equal with potential. But I had no idea what was coming next. If you're still here with me, tap the like button. It helps the channel more than you know. The next 3 years were 18-hour days, international flights, endless negotiations. James gave me opportunities but never handed me success. He made me earn every win. Every door I walked through, I had to prove I belonged there. And I did. 6 months in, I recommended a biotech investment everyone else had written off. Too early stage, too risky. The science wasn't proven yet. Every other analyst said no. It returned 14 times our money within 2 years. And people started paying attention. James made sure people knew it was my analysis. Emma Reeves saw what we missed, he'd tell other investors. While you were focused on safe bets, she found the breakthrough. While you were looking at pedigrees, she was looking at potential. My reputation was building. I moved from my tiny apartment to a modern loft downtown, bought my first car, a sleek gray Audi that felt like freedom. The first time I drove past a city bus, something shifted inside me. The girl who'd waited at those stops was gone, but I remembered her every single day. I became known for spotting companies on the verge of breakthrough. Founders requested meetings with me specifically. My opinion moved millions of dollars. People who would have looked through me 3 years ago now hung on my every word. But I never forgot where I came from. James taught me that real power was quiet. The most influential people spoke least and listened most. They didn't need to announce their importance. Their presence did it for them. Their decisions spoke louder than any words. And I was learning to speak that language fluently. I worked on becoming the fullest version of myself. Communication classes to eliminate the verbal tics that marked me as an outsider. Behavioral economics to understand how people made decisions, how they judged, how they dismissed. I was rewriting every rule they'd used against me. Biographies of people who'd built empires from nothing, studying their patterns, their strategies, their mistakes, learning how they'd turned humiliation into fuel, how they'd made the world bend to them instead of the other way around. And I was becoming one of them. I stopped being the humiliated girl crying at a bus stop and became Emma Reeves, junior partner at Thornton Capital. But I never forgot that night. The laughter, the bus ticket held up like evidence of my unworthiness. And then opportunity knocked. Marcus's pathetic shrug, Victoria's cruel smile as she destroyed me in front of everyone. I kept the torn bus ticket in my desk drawer, a reminder of where I'd been, of what I'd survived, of what I'd promised myself I'd become. And that promise was about to be kept. Then, 3 years and 2 months after that engagement party, an invitation arrived. Victoria was hosting a charity gala. My name was on the list because Thornton Capital was a major donor to several foundations. She had no idea I worked there. She had no idea the bus ticket girl had become someone who mattered, someone with real power. When James asked if I wanted to attend, I smiled. Yes, but I want to arrive properly. He raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? And I told him exactly what I needed. I thought of that mile-long walk in torn heels, the humiliation of pulling out a bus ticket while Bentleys gleamed around me. I want to arrive in a way she'll never forget. This wasn't just yes, it was destiny calling. And everything was about to change again. The evening of the gala, I chose carefully. A midnight blue Valentino gown. Elegant and understated, but unmistakably expensive. The kind of dress that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. Diamond pendant from James, a gift for closing our biggest deal yet. I was ready. I looked in the mirror and saw someone completely different from the girl in the cheap black dress. Same face. Different everything else. Different posture. Different confidence. Different power radiating from every gesture. The transformation was complete. This wasn't about showing off. It was about presence. About returning to a space that had diminished me and showing them exactly how much I'd changed. How wrong they'd been about who I was. About what I was capable of. About who I'd always been underneath. James had arranged everything. We're not driving, he'd said earlier. We're making an entrance. The helicopter waited at the private terminal, sleek and black like something from a movie. Like a weapon designed to shatter assumptions. And that's exactly what it was. As we lifted off, the city spread beneath us. Lights glittering, traffic crawling. The bus routes visible as arteries of light threading through neighborhoods I'd once called home. I could see my old apartment building from up here. The distance I'd traveled was breathtaking. You ready? James asked. I looked down at the Ashford estate, already glowing with lights and luxury cars filling the circular drive. 3 years, 2 months, and 6 days. But who's counting? He laughed. But we both knew I'd been counting every single day. As we descended, I watched conversations stop. The string quartet faltered, then fell silent. No one listened to music anymore. They watched this massive machine drop slowly toward the pristine lawn where they'd been sipping champagne moments before. And everything stopped. The downdraft sent wind rippling across the entire party. Centerpieces scattered. Dresses whipped and billowed. Rose petals spun through the air like snow. 200 people stood frozen, hands shielding their faces from the wind, staring upward. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked up. The helicopter touched down gently on the lawn. The pilot kept the blades running, creating a dramatic barrier of sound and motion. Then silence as the engines powered down. And that silence said everything. No laughter, no conversation, just stunned quiet. James stepped out first, offered his hand. I took it and stepped down, my gown catching the golden light from the estate. For a moment, I was suspended between two lives, between who I was and who I'd become. The girl who'd walked here in cheap shoes, crying and humiliated, and the woman who'd descended from the sky. I looked at Victoria on the terrace, frozen with her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Marcus stood next to her, pale with shock. The valet stood paralyzed. I let them absorb the full contrast. The bus ticket, the helicopter, the girl they'd dismissed, the woman who'd arrived like she owned the world. Then I smiled and walked toward the terrace like I'd done this 1,000 times, like I belonged, like I'd always belonged. The whispers started before I reached the stairs. Is that Emma Reeves? Wait, the bus ticket girl? That's impossible. How? That's James Thornton with her. Isn't that Marcus's ex? The one who took the bus? The recognition was spreading like wildfire. My heels clicked steadily up the stone steps, each step a declaration. I'm here. I belong. You were wrong about me. Victoria recovered first, years of social training kicking in. She extended her hand, but her voice trembled. The mask was already cracking. Emma, what a surprise. James shook her hand firmly. Victoria, thank you for hosting. Emma is my junior partner at Thornton Capital and handles our philanthropic investments personally. She suggested we attend tonight. Each word was a carefully placed hammer blow. Junior partner, Emma suggested. She handles our philanthropic investments. Each phrase was a hammer blow. I watched Victoria's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and calculation. The realization was dawning that she'd miscalculated badly, very badly, that the girl she'd humiliated in front of everyone had become someone who mattered, someone with actual power, someone who could destroy her with a single phone call. Marcus materialized from the crowd, trying for casual confidence and failing miserably. He looked terrified. Emma, it's been a long time. You look successful. Marcus, I said coolly, giving him nothing. No warmth, no acknowledgement of our history, just his name, like he was a stranger I barely remembered, because that's exactly what he'd become to me. James placed a subtle hand on my back. Protection, solidarity. The message was clear. You no longer matter. I turned back to Victoria, letting a small smile play at my lips. It's lovely to be back. And then I twisted the knife. Last time I was here, I arrived very differently. By bus, remember? You were kind enough to keep my ticket as a souvenir. I paused, letting the memory settle over everyone listening, letting them remember how they'd laughed, how they'd made me feel. I hope you still have it. It's a good reminder that things change, that the assumptions we make about others often say more about us than them. Victoria's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, closed it. Nothing came out, and the power shift was complete. Around us, the whispers grew louder. Someone near Marcus said clearly, "Isn't that the girl you dumped for not fitting in?" His face went white. The power had inverted completely. The hunter had become the hunted. Everyone there understood they were witnessing something rare. A complete reversal of fortune, delivered not with anger or bitterness, but with undeniable success. I'd become someone they couldn't dismiss. Someone who could make or break reputations with a single conversation. But I wasn't done yet. As the evening progressed, people who'd mocked me now wanted to network. They approached with champagne and fake smiles, pretending they'd never laughed, pretending they'd always seen my potential. I was polite, professional, but I remembered every single face. But I wasn't just there to show my transformation. When James had told me about the invitation weeks earlier, I'd done what I always did: research, deep research, the kind that uncovers uncomfortable truths. And I'd found something very interesting. I'd examined Victoria's foundation finances, tracked donations, cross-referenced programs with actual school records, interviewed administrators at the institutions she claimed to support. Something hadn't added up. Something was very, very wrong. The foundation claimed to support underprivileged youth, scholarships, mentorship programs, technology access, noble goals on paper. But actual program money was surprisingly small compared to administrative costs. The numbers didn't lie. Several partner schools didn't exist. Others had never heard of Victoria's foundation. The numbers told a story of deception, of vanity disguised as charity, of a woman exploiting the poor for social status. And tonight, everyone would know. I'd brought this to James a week before the gala. "Do what needs to be done," he'd said quietly. "People who exploit charity for their own image deserve exposure." Halfway through the evening, Victoria stood at a microphone describing the foundation's work, and I was ready. Her voice carried across the terrace, full of practiced emotion. She talked about changing lives, creating opportunities, being a voice for the voiceless. When she opened for questions, I raised my hand, and the trap was set. "Victoria, you mentioned 5 partner schools in your presentation. Could you name them specifically and tell us the exact amounts allocated to each?" The terrace went quiet. Victoria stammered, mentioned 2 schools vaguely, then tried to move on. But I wasn't letting go. "I'd love to provide more detail. Emma, I appreciate your interest." I smiled. I'm genuinely curious. As Thornton Capital's philanthropic director, I evaluate foundations for major donations. Your programs sound impressive, but I'd love specifics. And then James delivered the final blow. James added casually, "I think Emma's question deserves a complete answer. We're considering a 7-figure grant, but we need full transparency first." The trap had sprung. Victoria's face went pale. Her husband, Gregory, stepped forward quickly, but it was already too late. "We can provide detailed reports after the event." "Actually," I interrupted gently, "I have some of those reports already." I pulled out my phone, called up the documents I'd prepared. "Washington Prep. You claimed $40,000 in scholarship funding. But I spoke with their principal last week. They've never received any funding from your foundation. Never even heard of you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lincoln Youth Center. $75,000 for technology programs. But the center closed 3 years ago. Who received that money? Victoria's face went from pale to red. "How dare you?" "I'm simply asking questions any responsible donor should ask," I said calmly. And I kept going. "Riverside Academy. $50,000 for mentorship, but their records show no such program exists." Other donors started asking questions now. An older woman in diamonds spoke up sharply. "Victoria, I gave $200,000 last year specifically for scholarships. Where did that money go?" Victoria tried to regain control. "This is inappropriate. Emma is clearly trying to sabotage." "I'm trying to understand where donor money goes," I said. "Because from what I can see, 70% of donations go to administrative costs. Galas like this one. Your travel to inspect programs that don't exist, marketing materials. But actual programming? Minimal." Gregory tried intervening, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. But the damage was done. "This is a party, not an inquisition. If you have concerns, Ms. Reeves, you can address them through proper channels." "I already have," I said quietly. "I filed a request with the State Charity Board 3 days ago. They're conducting a full audit." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Victoria's face transformed. The polished socialite mask cracked completely. "You vindictive bitch," she hissed, forgetting the crowd around us. "This is about the bus ticket." And there it was. About some petty grudge because I laughed at you 3 years ago. I looked at her calmly. No anger, no triumph, just steady certainty. "This is about accountability. You taught me something important 3 years ago, Victoria. That appearances matter. Bus tickets, helicopters, designer gowns, charity galas." I paused, letting my words settle. "But I learned to build something real underneath my success. You just bought the costume." And she had nothing to say. She had no response. The crowd around us had grown silent again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was understanding. Seeing clearly for the first time what had always been hidden beneath the surface. The illusion was shattered. Victoria tried one last time, turning to the crowd with desperate energy. "Everyone, please. This woman arrives here in a helicopter to humiliate me." But several donors were already leaving. Phones were out. Not taking pictures this time. Making calls. Lawyers, accountants, people who needed answers. As Victoria realized she'd lost, she looked at me with pure hatred. "You've ruined me." "No," I said quietly. "You ruined yourself. I just asked questions." I thought I'd feel triumphant in that moment. But what I actually felt was complete. Justice, not revenge. Accountability, not cruelty. And somehow that felt infinitely better than any triumph could have. Within a week, 3 major donors pulled their support pending a full audit. The story spread through elite social circles faster than any gossip. The same people who'd laughed at my bus ticket now dissected Victoria's mismanagement with vicious precision. The elite turned on their own with remarkable cruelty when the facade cracked. The state audit revealed systematic mismanagement bordering on fraud. Donor money had funded Victoria's wardrobe, her first-class travel to programs that didn't exist. Elaborate galas where 70% of costs went to administration. Actual scholarships? Less than 15% of total donations. The board asked her to step down within 2 weeks. Her image as a philanthropic socialite collapsed overnight. Everything she'd built on lies crumbled. Invitations dried up. Her social media went quiet. The woman who'd built an identity on public generosity was revealed as someone who'd exploited charity for vanity. Marcus's firm encouraged him to take a voluntary 6-month leave. Karma had come for both of them. The career he'd protected by dumping me, by choosing appearances over integrity, took a massive hit because he'd been visibly associated with Victoria and her foundation. I heard through mutual connections that he tried reaching out multiple times. But I never responded. Apologizing. Explaining he'd been young and stupid. Asking if I could help repair his standing in the industry. I never responded. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Some people don't deserve second chances. And I was done looking backward. The real consequence wasn't Victoria's fall. It was how I was perceived afterward. The woman who'd held a powerful socialite accountable became someone people respected and, more importantly, didn't underestimate. My reputation shifted from successful to formidable. I received calls from foundations wanting integrity reviews, journalists wanting expert comments on charity fraud, universities wanting guest speakers on ethical philanthropy. I'd become someone whose judgment mattered, whose integrity was unquestioned. The transformation was complete. 6 months later, I saw Victoria at a restaurant downtown. She was with friends, her laugh too loud, too forced, trying to reclaim the social standing she'd lost. But the tables around her were empty. People had requested to move when they saw her. Our eyes met across the room. I saw anger, resentment, but also something else. Understanding that the world where you could be cruel without cost had limits. She looked away first. and I felt nothing but peace. I returned to my dinner with James and 2 founders we were considering investing in, always moving forward, never looking back at people who didn't matter. The bus ticket was still in my desk drawer, but now it meant something different, something powerful. 5 years after that helicopter landing, I'd made full partner at Thornton Capital, youngest in the firm's history. But my proudest accomplishment wasn't the partnership. It was what I'd built alongside it. The First Mile Fund, my true legacy. Named for that mile I'd walked to the bus stop in cheap heels, crying and broken. A reminder that first steps are always hardest, but most important. We invested specifically in founders from non-traditional backgrounds, people like me. People without family money, without elite connections, without the advantages that opened doors for others. We invested in a single mother who'd built a food delivery app on a library computer while her kids did homework beside her. Who understood logistics because she'd lived them. A formerly incarcerated founder who understood financial exclusion better than any MBA. Who'd built a mobile banking app for the unbanked. Immigrants who knew how fashion needed to change because they'd worked in factories, seen the waste, understood the workers' reality. The ventures Wall Street ignored because the founders didn't look right, didn't sound right, didn't come from the right places. 8 of our first 12 investments returned significant profit. But beyond returns, I was proud of the lives changed. Proof that talent existed everywhere if you looked beyond pedigree. And that became my mission, to prove that potential had nothing to do with privilege. I spoke at conferences about identifying overlooked talent, about challenging biases baked into funding decisions, about why the next billion-dollar company might come from someone riding the bus, not driving the Tesla. People listened because they knew I'd lived it. I told my story not for sympathy but to illustrate a point. Assumptions based on circumstances are wildly, dangerously wrong. The girl with the bus ticket might have more to offer than the boy with the trust fund. Struggle creates vision that comfort never could. The woman who walked a mile in torn heels might see opportunities invisible to someone who's never known struggle. Everyone listened, because everyone has been underestimated at some point. Everyone knows what it's like to be judged before you've spoken a word. I'd bought a home with bay views and floor-to-ceiling windows, adopted a rescue dog named Cooper, who'd been overlooked at the shelter too many times because he wasn't a puppy anymore. My mother retired comfortably in a house I bought her 3 blocks from the ocean. She'd cried when I handed her the keys. Hands that had scrubbed floors for decades finally able to rest. She kept a photo of me speaking at a tech conference, framed on her mantle. I'd catch her looking at it with quiet pride that meant more than any professional accolade. James, who'd become family more than mentor, told me recently, "You've exceeded every expectation I had, but more than that, you've stayed yourself. You've gained everything and lost nothing of who you are. That's the rarest thing in this world." The bus ticket stayed in my desk drawer at the office. Sometimes, late at night when I was working alone, I'd take it out and look at it. The faded ink, the torn edge where Victoria had held it up like evidence. A symbol of everything I'd overcome. That piece of paper had become the most valuable thing I owned. Not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. The moment everything changed. The moment I decided my worth wasn't determined by their judgment. I went back to that bus stop once, about a year ago. It was between meetings downtown. I had 20 minutes to kill, and found myself driving past the old neighborhood. Just a regular stop with a graffitied shelter and worn bench. The same bench where everything started. The same bench I'd sat on crying 3 years before. I pulled over and stood there, watching tired people board the afternoon bus. Nurses in scrubs, restaurant workers, students with heavy backpacks. People working hard, trying to get somewhere, just like I once was. A young woman got off, maybe 24. Dress that was trying hard to be professional but just missed the mark. Bag repaired multiple times with duct tape. Shoes worn down at the heels. Exhausted but determined. And I saw myself so clearly it hurt. I wondered what bus ticket she was carrying. What humiliation she'd faced that day. what assumptions people had made based on circumstances she couldn't control. And I wanted to tell her everything would be okay. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, that the hard parts were temporary, that the people who looked down on her today wouldn't matter tomorrow. But everyone's journey is their own. She'd have to find her own helicopter moment, whatever form it took. What I could do was keep building the First Mile Fund. Keep investing in the underestimated and overlooked. Keep asking uncomfortable questions when powerful people claimed virtues they didn't actually practice. Keep proving that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. The bus ticket Victoria mocked became the most valuable thing I owned. Not the paper itself, but what it represented. The moment I decided other people's limitations were irrelevant. The moment I chose to define myself rather than accept their definitions. They mocked me for being poor, for not belonging to their privileged world of inherited wealth and easy opportunities. And they were right about one thing. I didn't belong to their world. I was building something better, something real, something earned, not inherited. Something built on competence and integrity rather than connections and cruelty. Something that would outlast their shallow judgments and empty status symbols. Something that mattered beyond their small circles. The helicopter was never about luxury, never about showing off or proving a point. It was about arriving on my own terms, about demonstrating that the distance between a bus ticket and a helicopter is shorter than anyone thinks. About demonstrating that the distance between a bus ticket and a helicopter is shorter than anyone thinks, if you're willing to work for it and refuse to let someone's laughter define your limits. If you're willing to turn pain into purpose. Success isn't about revenge, though sometimes revenge is a satisfying byproduct. It's about becoming so completely yourself that the opinions of people who underestimated you become irrelevant. It's about building something they can't touch or diminish. It's about the deep satisfaction of knowing you earned everything. That no one can take it away because it's built on competence, not connections. On integrity, not inheritance. On work, not privilege. On vision, not pedigree. The silence that filled that mansion when the helicopter landed wasn't just shock at the spectacle. It was assumptions shattering, scripts rewriting, a world realizing their rules were fragile and their judgments were worthless. That was the real victory. That silence was worth every tear I'd cried on that mile-long walk, worth every bus ride where I'd felt less than enough, worth every moment I doubted whether I belonged. Because it proved I'd always belonged. They just couldn't see it. Because now I didn't just belong. I'd created a world where I made the rules. And no one, not Victoria, not Marcus, not anyone who'd ever looked through me like I didn't exist, could take that away. I'd built something unshakable. The girl with the bus ticket became the woman who owned the sky. And that journey, every painful step of it, made me exactly who I was meant to become. Every tear, every humiliation, every moment of doubt. It all led here. If you're watching this, wherever you are in your journey, comment where you're from. Let me know your story, because I want to hear it. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated or judged for circumstances you couldn't control, subscribe. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because everyone has a bus ticket moment. Not everyone gets a helicopter ending. But everyone deserves to know that the distance between them is shorter than you think. Your transformation is possible. Your moment is coming. And when it does, make sure they hear you arrive.